Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Gloria Danvers from Gloria Danvers Hypnosis, and I'm your host for A Higher Dimension. Today, I want to talk about truth. They say truth is subjective, but I don't really know about that. What I do want to talk about is why it feels so dangerous. Because if we're honest, most people aren't really afraid of lies. We live with lies every day. The lies we tell ourselves, the lies families protect, the lies relationships are built around, the lies we use just to keep functioning. What people most often are really afraid of is truth. Because truth changes things. Truth will ask something of us. Truth can cost us comfort, identity, relationships, certainty. It will cost us the old story that we built our life around. And yet, at the same time, truth is also the doorway to freedom. So why do we fight it so hard? I think this is one of the most pivotal questions in human life. Because when you really look at people, and when you really look at yourself too, you start to realize that most suffering isn't just about pain. A lot of suffering comes from the refusal to fully face what is true. And it's not because people are stupid or because they're weak. And certainly not because they're trying to be dishonest in some cartoon villain like Oil Can Harry way. It's much more human than that. Usually people avoid truth because at some point in their lives, the truth did not feel safe. It felt vulnerable, and it felt dangerous. Because truth is not just information or facts. Truth isn't just, well, this happened, or this person did this, or I feel that. Telling the truth, hearing the truth, acknowledging truth can have real consequences, like life-altering consequences. For example, if I admit this relationship is broken, then what? Or that my family is harmful and toxic, then what? What would happen if I finally admitted I'd been betraying myself for years? That I'm not happy or fulfilled, that I don't feel loved or safe. What would happen? What would happen if I admitted that I'm not aligned at all with the beliefs and practices that I say that I'm aligned with? What if the person I have been blaming is not really the source of all my pain, and that I have to acknowledge that to myself and to others? Then what? If I admit I already know the answer, then what do I do next? That is where the truth starts to feel dangerous. Because truth isn't frightening because we don't understand it. Truth is frightening because somewhere inside, we do understand it. And we already know that bringing the truth out and giving it light will rearrange something. I think a lot of people spend years trying to avoid one sentence, a sentence that they don't want to say out loud or even want to think about too clearly, because that would knock over the whole carefully balanced structure of the life that they've built. Sometimes the sentence is, my marriage is dead. Or, my mother never loved me the way that I needed her to. My father was really cruel and mean. I have made myself small so that I can get approval. I keep choosing pain because it feels familiar. I don't trust myself. Yes, I'm angry. Yes, I am grieving. Or, I don't want this life as it is. And I have been pretending that I do. I have outgrown this. It isn't that it's wrong. It's because I'm the one that needs to change. All of these are potentially life-changing sentences, and it's amazing how much energy goes into the not saying of any of these sentences. People will build entire identities around not saying the truth. Families do this all the time. Every family has its stories. Every family has its rules. Every family has the things that can be talked about and the things that absolutely cannot be talked about. And usually, the things that can't be talked about are the very things that most need air and light. In your family, maybe there were some unpredictable episodes, but nobody called it mental illness. Maybe there was abuse, but everybody called it discipline. Maybe there was a betrayal, and everybody just called it a rough patch. Maybe there was emotional neglect, but everybody called it, that's just how they are. Or there was favoritism, cruelty, manipulation, or outright dysfunction, but everybody kept smiling and setting the table and pretending to be normal so that they didn't get called out. And why? Because truth is disruptive. And once one person tells the truth, everybody else has to decide what they're going to do with it. And the person that tells the truth absolutely has no control over that. This is why families often protect the lie harder than they protect the wounded person. Because the lie protects the system. It allows everyone to stay in their place and keep playing their roles. The truth threatens those roles. It threatens that image. The truth threatens hierarchy. Who's bad? Who's good? The truth threatens the illusion of normalcy. When that illusion is the only thing that is keeping us tied together. The truth threatens the little agreements that everybody made, often unconsciously, about what must never be named if the structure is to remain standing. So if you are the one in a family who starts telling the truth, you're going to notice something very interesting. You're not always going to be treated like the healthy one. In fact, you will probably be treated like the problem. Not because you're wrong, but because you are dangerous to the arrangement. The arrangement says, we have all decided that this is who you are. This is the role that you are going to play. And when you refuse to play that role, everything's going to go to hell and it will all be your fault. Whatever that means to your family. And I know a lot of you that are listening now have lived that. You were the ones that noticed and questioned. You were the ones that wouldn't just swallow it anymore and say, no, that was not okay. You were the one who said, something is wrong here and I'm not playing along anymore. And because of that, you got punished. Punished psychologically, punished emotionally, just for opening your mouth and standing up for the truth. Because truth destabilizes whatever is built on silence. And that happens in families and relationships, friend groups, and institutions. It happens everywhere that human beings are more invested in comfort than reality. And it happens inside us too. Because we're not just dealing with other people's lies. We are also dealing with our own. And that is a little harder to talk about. It's really easy to look outside ourselves at someone else and say, well, they're in denial. They're avoiding reality. They just can't face the truth. But where are we doing it? That's the uncomfortable question. Where are we still protecting a story because it's easier than changing? What are we willing to twist to protect that story? Because if the stories fall, then everything else comes tumbling down. Where are we still pretending that we don't know what we know? And why are we still saying, I'm confused, when deep down inside, maybe we're not confused at all? Are we afraid? Maybe we're attached. We could be grieving. And honestly, we probably already know. But we don't want to deal with the consequences of knowing. And I think that happens a lot. I think sometimes confusion is real. And yeah, life can be complicated. But I also think sometimes what we call confusion is really resistance. Sometimes it's easier to stay in the I don't know than it is to step into I know, and now I have to decide. Because once you really allow yourself to know something, there's this kind of innocence that you lose. And simply put, you cannot unknow it. Once you see the pattern, you'll always see the pattern. Once you see the manipulation, you will always know that you're being manipulated. Once you see that you've been abandoning yourself all along, you see it and you cannot unsee it. Once you see that somebody is never going to become what you need them to become, you'll never be able to go back and believe. When you see that your suffering is being maintained by something in you that is still attached to the wound, you see it. And after that, life starts asking more from you. And that's another reason that truth feels dangerous, because it removes the hiding places and it asks you to grow. And here, on a higher dimension, we know that growth is not as glamorous as people make it sound. People talk about awakening as though it's all light and peace and angels singing in the background. And I hope for them that it is. But more often than not, awakening feels like nausea. Sometimes it feels like grief, or it feels like rage, or maybe even both. Sometimes it feels like your skin doesn't fit anymore. Sometimes it feels like everything that is a lie, everything that is false is rubbing against you, and you just can't tolerate it. Because truth doesn't just enlighten us. Truth also dismantles us. It takes us down. Not the deepest self, not the soul, but the social, emotional, and spiritual structures that we humans built in order to survive. And this is where the ego comes in. The ego gets talked about in a lot of strange ways, but for me, in a conversation like this, the ego is simply the part of us that organizes identity and tries to keep us safe in the ways that it has learned how to keep us safe. The ego is a protector. At least it thinks it is. The problem, what it calls safe, is not always actually what is healthy. The ego often prefers the familiar over the freeing. The ego says, stay with what you know. It's okay if it's painful. Even if what you know is humiliating and it's killing your spirit, stay there. Because familiar pain can feel safer than unfamiliar freedom. And that is a very hard truth, but there it is. People stay in bad relationships because they are familiar. They repeat painful patterns because they are familiar. They keep telling the same story about who they are because it is familiar. And cling to their old identities long after the identities have become prisons because they know how to survive there. And then the truth comes in and says, this is no longer working. And you would think that that would feel enlightening. Oh no, it feels threatening because it threatens the false safety of the known. And I think that's why people will defend illusions so fiercely. Not because illusions are wonderful, but because illusions often function like an emotional scaffolding. They hold the personality together until the person is ready for something truer. And that's why I try to have compassion for denial, even when I can see it clearly. And it's frustrating. Yeah, denial is frustrating. But I know that usually denial started as self-protection. At some point, not seeing was safer than seeing, and minimizing what was safer than naming it. At some point, disconnecting was safer than feeling, and at some point, obeying was safer than resisting. And then, at some point, performing as expected was safer than being real. So what we call denial is often survival that has outlived its usefulness. And that's important because that means we don't have to hate ourselves for it. We just have to notice when an old form of protection has become a prison. And that happens when we feel it constricting us, not allowing us to be free. And that's where the healing starts. Not by shaming ourselves and saying, how could I have not known? Usually we did know. At least some part of us did. Healing starts when we become willing to stop bargaining with what is true. And that can be such a long process because the truth doesn't come in a package. It doesn't come in a neatly wrapped up book. It comes in flashes. It can be this quiet knowing that just won't go away, something that keeps tapping you on the shoulder. Sometimes it comes through the body, through anxiety, through exhaustion, and through grief, through the inability to keep pretending, through the sudden revulsion you feel towards something that you used to tolerate, through the fact that you can't smile anymore and say the script and make it sound convincing, even to yourself. The body is often much less interested in maintaining the lie than the mind is. The mind can rationalize forever. The body tends to tell on us. It says, I'm tired and I cannot breathe in here. This person is not safe and this job is killing me. It says, this grief has not hit bottom yet. And this is costing too much. And if we don't listen, the signals usually get louder. And that's one of the reasons that I think truth has such a spiritual dimension to it. Because the soul, in my view, is always pressing towards what is real and what is authentic. The personality may want comfort. The conditioning may want approval. The trauma may want protection, and the ego may want control. But the soul wants truth. And not because the soul is cruel. It doesn't want to ruin your life. But because the soul knows that anything built on illusion will eventually become a place of suffering. And so the soul keeps pressing. Maybe gently, maybe not so gently. But it keeps pressing and pushing through your unrest, your dissatisfaction, pressing through the sense that something in your life looks fine from the outside, but feels dead wrong on the inside. Through the relationships that you can't quite make yourself disappear into anymore, pushing through those old coping mechanisms that just stop working, and the places where the mask that you wear gets too heavy to put on anymore. And I think a lot of spiritual growth is really about becoming brave enough to tolerate the truth, not just glimpsing it, not just talking about it in theory, but tolerating it in your body, in your life, in your choices, because that's the part that people don't always say out loud. Truth is liberating, yes. Truth will require you to disappoint people. And it will also require you to stop explaining yourself. It will require you to acknowledge and grieve over what never was. It can require you to admit that a chapter is over, or for you to see your own participation in your pain. And that's a hard one too, because some truths are about what was done to us, and other truths are about what we keep doing to ourselves. Both are tough, yeah, and both of them matter. Because at some point, if we really want freedom, if we really want that authenticity, we have to be willing to tell the truth in both directions. Yes, this hurt me. And yes, I have been helping to keep it alive. Yes, they failed me. And yes, I have continued betraying myself in the aftermath. Yes, this was unjust. And yes, now I am being asked to reclaim my life and not wait for the person who hurt me to give it back to me. And that's not blame, that's power. Because if all the truth does is tell you who hurt you, then you are still stuck in only half the story. The deeper truth is the one that also shows you where your life is waiting for you, what your responsibility is, where your freedom is, where your next becoming is. And that's why, for all the danger that truth seems to carry, it also carries a great deal of mercy. Real truth is mercy. It may not feel gentle at first, but it is mercy. Because a lie can keep you functioning, but it will never make you whole. A lie can keep a system in place, but it cannot set your soul free. A lie can preserve the false image, but it cannot nourish what is real. And at some point, if you want your real life, the life underneath the performance, underneath the adaptation, underneath the survival role, then truth is not optional. It becomes the doorway. And maybe that's why people circle around it for so long. Because deep down inside, they know that doorway is real. They know that if they walk through it, they will not be able to keep living in exactly the same way. And maybe that's the real terror. Not that truth will destroy us, but that truth will end the version of us that could live comfortably inside a lie, next to a falsehood, and all that went with that. And you know, sometimes that version of us really does need to end. Not in some violent or dramatic sense, but in the sense that an old identity has reached its expiration date. Because it was a self that was built around fear, around silence, around pleasing and pretending, and around not really knowing. It was a self built around carrying what never belonged to us. And eventually, that self becomes too small for the soul. And then the truth begins to feel less like an idea and more like pressure from within, the pressure towards alignment and honesty, a pressure towards life. So if you are in a season now in your life where the truth feels close, where something in you knows Something in you is tired of pretending. Something in you keeps returning to the same uncomfortable knowing. I just want to say this. You don't have to rush it, and you don't have to force it. But you also do not have to keep insulting your own soul by pretending that you do not know. You know more than you think you do, and you certainly know more than is comfortable for you to know. Maybe not every detail, maybe not every step, but you know enough. Enough to begin being honest with yourself and to stop calling your intuition with confusion. To stop saying, I don't know, and start saying, yeah, I do know. Enough to stop dressing up your fear as uncertainty and to stop making a home inside a lie just because it's familiar. And I guess that's the point of this episode today. The truth feels dangerous because it will change the terms of your life. But those lies, they have a cost too. The lie will cost you energy, peace, health. It costs you what it means to be fully alive. It costs you intimacy and self-respect, and sometimes, yes, it will cost you precious years. Oh yes, the truth is dangerous. And we're going to reframe that thought. Truth is dangerous to the false. It is dangerous to the mask. It is dangerous to the arrangement, to the denial, and to whatever was built on silence. But it is never dangerous to the soul, because the soul can live through a hard truth. What the soul can't live through forever is a life built on distortion. So maybe the question is not, why does the truth feel so dangerous? Maybe the deeper question is, what in me is so invested in avoiding the truth? What identity was I hiding behind? What role? What attachment? What fear kept me stuck in the old survival strategy? Because once you start asking yourself that, you're already getting closer to freedom. Not easy freedom, certainly not instant freedom, but real freedom. And I think real freedom almost always begins with the truth. There's an old saying, everybody's heard it, that the truth will set you free. And you are welcome to explore that saying as deeply and fully as the life that you want to live that is authentic and real will let you. You know, all of us have places where we know and don't want to know at the same time. That's part of being human. But if you are in that place right now, I hope this gives you something to hold on to. The truth is going to shake your life. And yes, it's going to ask more of you than comfort ever did. But it is also the beginning of coming home to yourself. And if this is what you're working on, and you find a place where you're stuck, there is no need to stay in that place of being stuck. Hypnotherapy will help you smooth that out so that you can ascend to your next level of authenticity, of being real, and having a real authentic life that you don't have to hide from or pretend about. And that's worth a lot. And thank you for being here with me today. I hope I've given you a different perspective about some things and some food for thought. So I will be back in 2 weeks. And until then, stay real. Bye.